Hi, I'm Andy Acton.
And I'm Chris Strevens.
This is Dentology, the Business of Dentistry podcast. We've known Gary for many years. He's an impressive individual, isn't he?
He's been around for a long time, but actually he's a really nice guy. I know that sounds a bit odd, but he's just nice. I mean, when we deal at Frank Taylor and Associates with Gary, the one thing you can say about Gary is he's honest.
Yes. Yeah.
Which is not what you can say about other potential buyers. He's just honest. He's a genuine guy. And I love his story and the fact of, you know, he almost, I feel in a way, he's almost like a bit self-effacing in the fact of, it's almost like by luck he's achieved. But, you know, I think you make your own luck.
I think he's remarkably entrepreneurial. And he's also got a great overview of dentistry. And
what the changes he's seen.
Yeah, and also he's somebody who kind of understands the value of taking time. There's no rush. You know, if you look at the things that he's achieved, some of them have really built nicely over a period of time.
I think what's amazing is he's been in dentistry longer than probably most of our listeners have been alive.
Yeah, well, I think he said 44 years. Quite remarkable.
Which is somewhat interesting. So if you qualified as a dentist, what was that, 23?
Yeah. Oh, it's remarkable. Yeah.
When you factor that in, anyone over 68?
Yeah, no, it's wonderful, wonderful.
That's good.
We do hope you enjoyed this episode. And if you do, please do subscribe. And if you could share it with somebody else who would benefit from it, that would be amazing. Thank you very much.
Yes, indeed.
Recording day.
It is indeed podcast recording. A very, very enjoyable day because we meet and talk to some very interesting people.
It's funny, isn't it? When you look now, you know, we're up at kind of 130 plus episodes. It's building a really nice catalogue of content around the business of dentistry.
It is. And the people who listen, thank you very much, they listen all the way through. I think that's what's flipping amazing is they don't sort of listen to 10 minutes and think, oh, this is boring and cancel off. They listen all the way through. So thank you, all our listeners. You're the ones that make it worthwhile and make it interesting for us as well.
And I think also it goes to serve that people are interesting. And today we've got a very interesting gentleman. We're joined by Gary Chapman, and Gary is the Director of M&A UK and Europe for Portman Dentex.
It's got good air miles.
He joined when it was Portman, but now he's still there at Portman Dentex. How you doing, Gary? Good to see you.
I'm fine, guys. Fine, guys. Thank you for having me on your Dentology podcast.
Pleasure. Thank you for saying yes.
Well, I think you're going to be a really, really interesting conversation. I don't think people will appreciate just how long you've been in dentistry.
Even by looking at him, they wouldn't appreciate it.
No, exactly. But
Thanks,
just
Chris.
to get that sense of how it's changed over, in your case, it's decades, it's not years. Will be fascinating for our listeners. But also you've traversed so many different areas of dentistry as well, and we'll come right up to date in terms of where you are with Portman Dentex. But I mean, we've known one another for close on 20 years, I'd have thought, something like that. So we bought Frank Taylor and Associates back in 2000. It was very soon after that we kind of got to know one another. But before we kind of get to that kind of beginning when we met one another, there's a whole period and a chapter before that. But even before that, what was your upbringing like? What was your childhood like?
I had a good upbringing, great parents, you know, supported me. I've got two brothers, all went different ways. One's a truck driver, one's took over my dad's company, and I didn't want to be a builder. So I ended up, it was quite an irony of life is that I was going for a job at the Dental Estimates Board because I used to live in a town called Bexhill, which was next to Eastbourne. And it was £1,500 a year as a programmer. And I couldn't program to save my life, but it was like, you know, but I was a junior young badminton player at the time, and a guy that I played badminton with had dental laboratory, and he was looking for an apprentice, and I wasn't the smartest kid on the block when it came to school, so didn't need any qualifications. So instead of going to the Dental Estimates Board, I went to a dental laboratory, and that's how I ended up in June 1980 as an apprentice dental technician. And I can remember the first first denture I made was for Mrs. Young. I don't know how you remember these things. But
Wow, wait,
in my bite blocks and my special trays, and a lot of your listeners will probably, know that technicians can be your best friends and your worst enemies all in the same day. And certainly more back then. I was lucky. I believe I was lucky because 44 years later, I'm still in dentistry.
I think we should just clarify for people that heard you say you were offered a job for £1,500 a year. That was right.
That's correct.
That's back in the 1980s. Yeah. That's what you earned as an annual wage. So I think it just shows how the world significantly moved on.
I still remember my first salary. Do you remember your first annual salary?
Oh, it's a big moment.
It is. I remember my first Lloyd's Bank salary, £2,984 plus London waiting.
Plus London waiting. Those were the days. Those were the days. So 44 years in dentistry, starting as a technician. Can you just paint us a picture of what dentistry was like in those early days? I know you're on the technician side then, but was it incredibly manual? Was it in essence the same as what it is today, just we've got more technology around us?
And what were people like? I think that's the thing I've noticed is the change in people.
Yeah, it was far more manual. I mean, we were 3 technicians in the back of a practice with 3 dentists, and 2 technicians and me as an apprentice, and that ran that laboratory flat out. And we
just for that one practice, down in Bexhill,
Eversley Road, and it was a time and a place where it was totally different. And then if we worked for 1 or 2 practices round the corner, we thought we were millionaires, as Del Boy would say, and that we were really on the up. But hard work, the sympathy for technicians back then is, it was a 7 till 7 job, and that would be normal. And you wouldn't even really think anything different of that. It wasn't your 9 till 5. You had to have everything ready to go, and that's how it was. And it never really changed, I think, for years. And I even think now you look at some laboratories, they work so hard, and it's always been a tough industry to be in. And now, that is coming to fruition, where technicians aren't walking into this industry, and I don't want to get political, but not walking into the industry because they're just not well paid. Are not well paid enough.
When you were at school, were you creative? You said you weren't like whatever exam. Were you like creative or arty or anything like that?
No, I was
okay, interesting.
Sports. It was the sport mad. Football, rugby, anything I could get that and I was always clipped round the ear for looking out the window. Chapman, pay attention. So that's what I got done for. But I wasn't a creative guy at all.
It's just I always think lab's a bit of an artistry as much as a functional thing, isn't it? 'Cause you sort of got to get it right. Yeah. So whether you're colour matching or whatever, that's sort of I had
a wonderful teacher who became partner. It's a guy called Simon Adams. Terrific technician. One of the first clinical dental technicians in the country. A good man, and you through life, I think if you're lucky enough to have these people in your life, I think they shape you. We became partners. We built one of the biggest labs in the country at the time to nearly over 50 people. So that was from being his apprentice to being his partner to really being his boss at the end of the day. But for me, it was not about I was any good as a technician. It was that I was pretty good at the business side of it.
Yeah. So back in the 80s, Gary, you were saying that the lab that you worked in was at the back of a dental practice. Was that quite common practice for dental practice to have a lab integrated into the practice? And when did that, and if that was the case, when did that kind of change where people outsourced and labs got bigger?
I think it probably changed towards the end of the 80s. You used to have your Broughton and Tyrrells and, there were big labs, and I think Little John's in Glasgow, but there wasn't very many of what we called full service laboratories.
Right.
And what we saw the opportunity was that we were just doing dentures and basic crown work, And then in the middle 80s, bonded crowns came out, and we then took that up, and that sort of flew. But then we had to move out of that shed, which it basically was at the back of a dental practice, into, you know, our own sort of laboratory. So we then became what I called a full service laboratory, you know, where we did everything from Adam's cribs to bridge work, implant work, and then hired the technicians. And there was a lot more technicians around. And ironically, that was my first dip into acquisitions, because we acquired the obvious thing then was to acquire some labs and bring them in, because we had the British Standards BS 5750, it was called. So it's when labs had to adhere to a regulation, and obviously the smaller labs couldn't do it. And as a bigger lab, we could, you know, and then, you know, it's many different pathways. We actually invented our own software that is used by a lot of labs now, called Transactor. And it came from our lab because we needed a window-based laboratory system that we could track all the work and where it was going. So we created our own. And hundreds of labs use that now, even though I'm not involved in it anymore.
Yeah,
it's fun, isn't it? Because you think, as you were mentioning it, I was thinking, do you remember when we used to do valuations sort of the beginning when we bought the business? There would always or virtually always be some sort of trimmer or something in the back. And nowadays, I just suddenly thought you rarely see that unless it's an old school dentist, you know. But there would always be in that room full of white plaster and powder where they'd have their trimming wheel and their polishing or whatever it might be. And I suddenly thought, I remember that when those early days, but that's changed so much now.
Is digital dentistry, Gary, is that you were saying about we're not seeing the kind of young technicians coming in? Is it now they're coming in and sitting at laptops? And with the advent of digital dentistry and looking at things like what SprintRay and other companies are doing in that space at the moment, is it becoming a very technology-led industry, and we're moving away from that kind of that manual eye, that manual craft? This week's episode is brought to you in partnership with Ultimate Dental Business. We know as guys who have supported dentists for over 25 years and through hosting this podcast that building business skills in dentistry is vital. Time and again, we hear from dentists who tell us that they find the business side of dentistry the most challenging. And we know that stress and pressure comes from doing things we don't feel well equipped to do. That is why we are delighted to be part of Ultimate Dental Business, the new dental business hub delivering top-tier business training for dentists. Founded by Dr. Brad Thornton and Dr. Krupal Shah, Ultimate Dental Business is a response to the lack of robust dental business education currently available. Through our effective collective discussions with dentists, it was clear they most needed good structure and effective guidance to give them the knowledge and tools to be successful dental business owners, and to create a business that serves them rather than the business that takes all their time and energy to keep going. To find out more about developing your own business education, click on the link in the show notes or go to ultimatedentalbusiness.com.
I still think you have what I call conventional laboratories. You still will have them, and you will have that service laboratory that is going back, if you want, full circle to the lab that's at the back of the practice. And some of the practices have those bespoke labs. But you are right. Even if you look at any lab, they're either having an internal scanner, and you go back to when Procera first came out with, their scanning of the preps and then sending them off. You know, so the thought process of the technicians is to have sort of scanning or printing within the practice, and if they haven't got that, then they're outsourcing it to a laboratory that does do it and then sends the work back to them. So you are right, Andy, that technology is certainly driving the technical side of the business, unless I think somebody told me last year 27 technicians qualified in the whole of the UK. 27. Wow. And there's a number, 27, where there was, in my day, there was guys where I did mine and, you know, qualification and all these places that technicians were coming out, Manchester and Birmingham, but 27 in the whole of the UK qualified.
Wow. And in your opinion, would you say the digital results are as good, better, worse than an actual technician working on it?
it depends what you're doing, really. I mean, that real niche bespoke, is going to be very difficult for machines to replicate. But some of the stuff that is being produced by the machines, shall we say, is extraordinary and extraordinarily accurate. So it's showing, the good dentistry that's being done by dentists. It highlights it. It also highlights, the not such good dentistry being done by dentists, because it's going to work both ways. And and you can analyze it before you send it. So trim a bit more here or do a bit more there, But it's a good thing in the long run.
Yeah, I think for mainstream dentistry, it certainly puts in workflows and a consistency that perhaps wasn't there before.
And I suppose you pay for it, don't you, for bespoke? Because it's a bit like, I suppose, if you can go and buy a VW Audi or you can go and buy a Bentley. Yeah. And the answer to the difference is how much time someone spends on it, I presume, and uses their skill and technique. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah. So in terms of, because you're obviously an entrepreneurial guy, so how did you go? Well, so how did you go from being an apprentice lab technician to ending up owning a lab? What was, you said, you worked with, was it Simon Adams, and kind of, you built it with him, but what was that a bit like an associate, buying into a dental practice and going from there? Was it a similar pathway? Yeah,
I had to spend £30,000 to buy into the lab that was turning over £80,000, and I had my 45%, 47% and 50%, but it was a bit like that, But the difference between myself and Simon at the time, God rest his soul, was that he was a wonderful technician, but he really wasn't a businessman, and you could see where this was going. So it was to drive now the business, and you put me in front of people. It was, I'm selling like my dental laboratory to it's on time. And I would always say that our lab was never a great lab. We weren't a high end. We didn't produce fantastic work, but it was on time. It fitted, and it was the right shade. And dentists love that. They knew it was going to be there the day before, and you can build a business around, you can build a really big business around that sort of, promising what you can deliver.
Well, it makes it sound like a lot of the technicians didn't, by the sounds of things, or they were maybe late or needed rework. So therefore, you managed to hit the sweet spot where we just did what we said we were going to do.
Yeah, we weren't the perfect lab, Chris, by no means. And I think any business, whatever business we're in, we're not perfect, but we just had that time where one van would come and pick up all your lab work, take it back to one lab, and then it would all be back, just say for arguments, the next day, all ready and done. So that was the time where there was no lab like ours in the southeast. And we ended up going to Wales, where I first had my first contact with a guy called James Hull, and became his technician. So this is how this all starts to see how this all rolls. And so. Yeah, I mean, we became a very large laboratory. Not the best in quality standard, absolutely not. But certainly,
what I love is you acknowledge what you're good at. It was good enough work. It was a good shade, but also you delivered on time, and that consistency. I think working out where they say, don't they? You can have it fast, you can have it good, you can have it cheap, but you can only have two of them. And you worked out where you were, and by your own admission, you're saying it wasn't the best. You could get better. But our price was good, the colour was good, and you would get it on time. And that matters. And because you did it on a routine basis, people know they're going to get good service.
Yeah, it was predominantly NHS, Andy. It was 90% NHS, 10% private.
Yeah, that's true in those days. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, it was, So, it became a multi-million-pound laboratory. So
that's really interesting, isn't it? The James Hull.
That's impressive for 80 grand. Yeah,
because that was I think I met James early 90s. I think when I was still working in a bank. I remember vaguely.
Before we get to James and your kind of corporate world, what was your involvement in implants in the early years? Because that was quite a new technology and evolution. How did you get involved in that?
Well, we were doing implants within the business. for not very many, but a few for some Straumann predominantly, from some dentists, and went to an ADI meeting, one of the first ADI meetings, and listened to a chap called Ashok Sethi speak and Peter Soccer, and they were and a guy called Stuart Harding, and a lot of your listeners will know these names, and they were doing something really clever with angled abutments. I won't be too prescriptive, but it was clever stuff, and it was so far ahead of its time. Cut a long story short, with Ashok and Peter and these guys, we started, and a guy called John Gould, who was a wonderful engineer, we started our own implant company that is still going, called Osteocare. And it flourished. It flourished to a degree until let's just say headwinds got a bit strong, but we took it abroad, we sold it abroad, and it became again quite a successful little business, and I'm sure it still is, and I hope it still is, because they were good people, but it was that sort of, we became the distributors of the implant system. So because we were technicians, we could advise the dentist what they needed, when they needed it, not in implants or placements, but you should have this angled abutment and this healing collar. So what then it did is, again, another, when you get into the future of my life, it introduced me to a lot of high-earning implant dentists, he's and she's, across the whole country, that wanted to have a look, at this system. And because Ashok and Peter were such wonderful teachers, and they were wonderful, they taught dentists how to do implant dentistry at the time. I think our first course was back in Ealing in 1992, if I remember rightly, that I was involved with. So that's how I got into implantology, and through that time, selling it in, I was saying to somebody today, one minute I was in Damascus, and then I was in Poland, and then I went to the States, but I met some wonderful people and learned so much, so with the still having the laboratory as well.
Right.
And our own dental practice.
And then I guess at some point you then developed this relationship with James Hull to a deeper level, because you were heavily on the M&A side with James as he was developing his group. So had you, at that time, had you exited the lab? Was that your full-time thing with James, or were you spinning lots of plates? No,
what happened then is that you could say for 2 years, 3 years, I was out of dentistry and into the Botox and all that side of training dentists, and then actually owning my own clinic called Rejuvenate in Harley Street. So basically what happened, we ran that, built that up. We had a clinic in, as I said, in Harley Street and in Pont Street behind Harrods, and built that up. And then basically James said he wants to do what was called the face clinics, facial aesthetic centres of excellence they were called. And he took that off me, and I became the guy that was going to drive the face clinics across the group. And at that time, James had 23 practices. Incredible man, but I just wasn't any good at that, and it just didn't really float my boat. And the guy that was doing the M&A in James Hull was an accountant that really wasn't understanding of when he had to converse with dentists. So James gave me that chance and gave me that education of how to cut a deal, how to, I knew how to speak to dentists, but I didn't know. I can remember I was so embarrassed because he said, well, the EBITDA, and I'm sort of thinking, I'm sitting there nodding. I didn't even know what it meant.
There's a lot of people that do that today, Gary.
You were thinking it was a new a lab technique.
Something like that. But EBITDA, What does that mean, Angus? At the time. So it's quite funny that. But I mean, when I look back, he as he said to me, he wanted somebody, because we had the relationship through the lab and the group that we'd done a lot of the lab work for, somebody, we'd literally left each other and then back together, and somebody could trust. Somebody could trust, to spend the money he thought wisely. And and that's what that's how I started doing the mergers and acquisitions for James Hull Associates at the time.
Right, yeah.
So, yeah.
So you're with him for a fair chunk of time, and then did you go straight from James Hull to Portman in 2009, or was there another chapter in between?
Yeah, basically because total mismanagement by the private equity guys. That's the reality. We all left in October. I think it was September, October 2009, and
wow.
So operations, the operational girls, it was like a mass exodus. And when you can't have James Hull in James Hull at that time, because he was a character that was larger than life. What anybody thinks or says, he was a pioneer in my eyes.
He was, definitely those early days for sure.
Him and David and David Hudley. These are guys that none of us would be here now if it wasn't for those men that saw these visions. And
well, they were doing something that hadn't really been done before in dentistry. And when we operate in a market now where there's quite a lot of corporates and multiple owners, it's easy to go, well, yeah. But back then,
there weren't many.
It was
Pogo, wasn't it? Colin Pogo was that?
Pogo. Colin Pogo. When you think of agents, there was you guys. That was it.
Yeah.
When I started, there was Frank Taylor Associates. That was it. And you were the go-to people that every practice in my day, amount of conversations we would have back then, and then obviously there was a lot that weren't, having, advisors if you want.
Yeah. So you joined Portman as it was then in 2009. They have 2 practices. You've got 440 in the UK and across Europe, or upwards of 440 across the UK
around
at the moment. So it's gone pretty well, hasn't it?
We've been very lucky. We've been lucky. We got a wonderful, wonderful man in Sam Waley-Cohen and the Waley-Cohen family, because in my opinion they had the vision. And Sam
on that point, what was the business plan when you joined that business in 2009 and you sat down with Sam? What was the plan for what Portman was going to become 15 years ago?
Well, I think I like to think I had a little hand in it, where I'd learned what you do and what you don't do when I was in James Hull. And when I look back on those days, we were in I bought 62 practices in 3 years for James, and I didn't have a clue what I was doing for the first 6 months, really. It was just, but then it was buy to sell. Gary, and this is not James saying we're going to build this business up as quick as we can and we're going to flog it. Very clear. Don't care who we buy. Don't. And why I say this, Andy, Chris, is it sort of sets the scene of when Portman and Sam and Mark Hamburger and Sam's dad, it was we're going to buy quality. Because we knew at James Hull, where we'd moved from those first lot, which were more NHS based, to the next lot, which were more private and specialist, that if you bought very good quality practices with very good quality people, you had the chance of building a very good quality business. And I think if I look back, that was the time that we're not going to buy NHS, and I'm sure a lot of people will remember that they thought we were mad. I can have people coming up to me, well, why aren't you buying this NHS practice, or why aren't you buying that NHS practice? And we're going to buy private and buy quality, and ultimately we'll be masters of our own destiny rather than beholden to any third party, the government, of where we're going to go and what those pay rises and rises are going to be, I suppose.
You mentioned Sam. We've met a few times, and he's a lovely guy, very charming, remarkable individual. I mean, to win the Cheltenham Gold Cup back in 2011, and then the Grand National, and his last race in 2022 on Noble Yeats, a 50-1 outsider. It's just, it really is. There's a film, isn't there? There's a film hanging in the background of the guy's life. What's he like as an individual to work with? Obviously, you work with on a daily basis. What's he like as a guy?
Top man. top. He's a. I can't express, near enough. It's like a bromance. I wouldn't say, but he's a. I think we had in our 15 years of working together. I can honestly say we've had probably one disagreement, and he was right, and I was wrong. But which is normal. But he is a good man, sharp and clever and good looking, and I hate him in some ways. But
all the stuff we don't like.
All the stuff we don't like. But as a man to work for that's 40 odd years old, he's one of the smartest guys I've ever met in my life. And I'm proud to be working for Sam. He gave me the opportunity. I didn't have a job, at the time, and he gave that opportunity, and he had the vision. He wanted to build the best corporate group in the world. And you'd laugh at that. But now when you look, some people are now laughing on the other side of their face.
Doing all right, isn't it? Yeah.
That he is building that, and he is the governor at the end of the day.
Yeah. No, it's going incredibly well. How would you describe the changes that have affected the corporate world, from your very beginning days with James, but to where we are now, and what the future looks like for the dental corporate landscape?
Well, I think corporate dentistry is only going to grow and grow and grow, and I think it's inevitable. I think you're seeing a lot of corporates out there, and I'll probably say some things that are controversial, but this is probably what people want to hear. You have corporates that are out there that are buying to sell. Quite simply, they're buying at X, they're selling at Y, they're making their money, and they're walking off into the sunset. Don't really care what they buy. I know personally that is not the way to go. I don't know if that's answering your question as you asked it, Andy, but if you sell or go into the right corporate, and there are good corporates out there. There are good people out there. We're not the only one, and some people will say we're not good or we're not bad. But I think if I always say to dentists, if you become part of that, if you embrace, all right, you've sold the business and you've got a lot of money in your pocket, but if you embrace the future with the group that you're selling to, it can be fantastic. Yeah. If you don't, then it can be a whole world of pain. And that's the reality, and we, and I would say well, I can only talk for us, but I would say I don't like to buy practices just for the money. If the seller is all about how much I can get, it's not really of any interest anymore. And that's the discipline. So corporate dentistry historically has always been a bit of a whipping boy. I think dentists should thank their lucky stars corporate dentistry is about, without a doubt, because if it wasn't for corporate dentistry, I don't think dentists would be getting the money and cash that is available now for practices. I can remember guys when I look back in the 80s, sort of rewinding a bit, where you would go on Monday morning to drop some work off at the practice, and the guys closed down, and there's a notice outside the, please go around. I've retired now. Please go around the corner to Mr. Forsyth, where he will look after you. And you know that as well as I do. People would just close the doors.
That's right. They never sold. They never had value.
So and that apparently my colleagues in Germany say that still happens.
Well, it's interesting you mentioned Germany, because I was thinking of the company out there, Milag. And I know the brothers who are kind of running the business at the moment, and they were telling me that business was set up by their grandfather and then ran by their father, and now they're running the business. And it very much is a generational business. There's no plan to build the business and exit. We seem to have a very different culture, particularly on the dental side over here, that it seems to kind of buy, build, exit is very much kind of the cornerstone of a particular sector within dentistry. But that's not the tactic that you're taking at Portman, is it? That's not your approach.
No, sorry, Andy, for interrupting, but you're absolutely right, because as we sit here, the guy that founded it is still the group CEO. The guy that started the M&A is talking to you now, and all right, we've had a few movements in people, but the family, the Waley-Cohen family, is still, invested heavily in the business. I am, and as a lot of people are, because we believe we're building something special. And we were offered a lot of money once for our business from another group, shall we just say, and we turned it down because we would have been lying to the people that we'd acquired that we're not going to buy the business and flog it off, and that was one of those salient points where let's keep on building what we've already, the foundations on what we've already built, so it's worked well, but you need good leadership. That's the key, I think, to be honest with you.
In a sort of bizarre way, it's sort of similar to some of the sales, isn't it, that FTA does, Frank Turner does. We do get the people who, some people will sell for money, but some people sell because they like the person, they choose the person they like.
Personality.
And I always think that's quite heartening when we find someone, someone might actually not be the highest price, but the vendor really likes that person and buys into what they want to do, and they will sell. And that's sort of similar to what you're saying, isn't it, really? It's about the guys that catch the vision and where they want to go, not necessarily the money.
But I think a really good agent, respectfully, you're there to make money, no question. This is a business, and we're all in business to do the best we can for our business. But what sets good agents apart for some of the not such good agents, because there are the whole plethora, like there is corporates, is finding the right buyer for the right seller. I think that's a big role to play, and obviously then brokering the right deal for the right buyer and seller. That everybody walks into that relationship with their stomach feeling good. This is where we can move forward. And, and I'm going to sit here and say, Portman isn't always the right Portman Dentex. My apologies. I do make that slip up sometimes, but isn't always the right place for the people that may want to be in the business, So I think it's a really important part, and you're seeing that dynamic change with the advice that representatives are given. Who do you think you want to work with? I'm working with you, closely, Andy. We touched on deals and people like that that you've been incredibly helpful with. So this
but
is
also I think it's
changes.
and I think as time goes on, it's becoming more and more important, because lots of people, when we started in this game, lots of people were selling out in their 60s. Whereas now lots of people are selling out in their 40s, late 40s. So they are going to be working on. So the partner they ultimately sell to is really important, because they're not going to be selling and going. If you sell in your 60s, it kind of doesn't really matter, because you're probably hanging up your handpiece and you're gone. Whereas if it's late 40s, who you work with really matters. And that matchmaking of buyer and seller, I think, is a critical part. Because you also want the person who buys a practice to go on and have success and it thrive. Whether it's a corporate or an independent, whoever it is. Because in terms of the future of dentistry, you need those businesses to thrive
in your business as opposed to go and do it again somewhere else.
And a really good stat that we have in the group, and this is I can only speak for Portman because these stats go back quite a way, is that 88% of our dentists that complete their contracted period stay within the group.
Right. So it's high, isn't it? Yeah, that's good.
And when you look back on the old days of corporate dentistry, you did your time, you was out. Or some people did their time and they left before, and didn't give a hoot about their deferred payment. But 88% means that we must be doing something right. And I think the average age is, as you are so, you're absolutely right, Andy, is about in the 40s now, 45, 46, that people are selling younger to the group.
Well, I also have a notion, I think there's a thing, owner fatigue. And I think owner fatigue sets in around about 10, 11 years. I think people own a business, and after 10, 11 years, they're just like, I'm done. This is hard work. And depending on when you buy, if you buy early 30s, that probably starts to kick in early, mid-40s. So I don't think it's a coincidence that there's lots of people within that age window that have owned a business for a period of time, because it is hard work. Because you move beyond just being a clinical dentist. There's a whole batch of other things you need to be good at.
All the businessy stuff that you've never learnt about that you don't really like doing. And dealing with people. Who wants to deal with people?
It's a hard industry for dentists. I mean, I always used to be, I used to think, well, the dentist has got the Porsche and I've got the Peugeot. You know, and to the end of the day now, those dentists earn their Porsche if that's what they've got, because it's a whole different world for dentists, you know, and probably the technicians have a far easier time than they ever did in some ways, you know.
Yeah. When we came to a Portman Dentex event recently,
very enjoyable.
In
Thank you for the invite.
It was great fun.
You're welcome.
Great fun. And I was talking to Sam, and it was Sam that told me about your prowess playing badminton as a young man. And you weren't just decent. I mean, you played for England, which is pretty phenomenal. And I never knew. And it's funny the things you never get to. But do you think your level of sport and that kind of intensity and competitive nature has helped you in business? I'm always fascinated at this link across from sport into business. Do you think that has actually helped you, that competitive nature?
Without a doubt. You do not like you don't like that silver medal. You don't like, I mean, it was junior level at the end of the day, or a little bit of senior, but you don't want to be second best, you know, and I think ultimately that you don't want to be runner up. You don't want to be the best loser, or whatever they call it. You want to win.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, that's right.
First of the losers, isn't it?
Yeah. But that drives you. And then you look at Sam, you know, with his horse racing, you know, that is a tough old sport. That's a far tougher sport to be than hitting a shuttlecock across the net. But what it does, it gives you discipline. It gives you you're only rewarded by what you put in. You know, so I think from I'm sure a lot of your listeners are golfers or badminton, squash, whatever. They're there to win, and I think that you just really carry that over into your business, you know, and it's a
part of your DNA, isn't it? I think
it is. Yeah, it
is.
I mean, he wasn't a bad badminton player as well, Andy, if I remember, Essex. And
I played a bit. Not your standard, but I'm the same with you. I played to win, and I think sport should be played to win, and there shouldn't be anything that you should kind of be embarrassed about, or you know, oh no, everybody won. No, in sport you do have a winner and you have a loser, and that's just the way it is. And I think some of those kind of skills you learn, kind of resilience, coping with failure, because whilst winning is great, you know, I think someone was telling me like Michael Jordan's win rate over his career was something like 34%. So if he can only get to that number, it shows that in life we will lose a lot more than we can win. Definitely. But that builds resilience. You know, you need to know what losing feels like. But it's interesting to hear that has fed into your business life.
Yeah, but it's like losing the practice to one of your competitors. That hurts. That hurts. You know, you put a lot of work into it, and somebody else walks off with the practice. But
sounds like even us, even now, when we lose a sale to someone, we're
does.
Like,
it matters. It matters, and it should matter. And if we get to a point where actually we shrug our shoulders and we're not bothered, it's probably a bit late.
Retirement.
Retirement. It's probably a bit late.
It is indeed. Yeah, it's a good thing. Sport. I encourage my grandchildren, my children with their children, to make sure they do something that brings that sort of discipline. I don't know if that's the right word, but that sort of thing into them.
Yeah. Gary, we've got to the point where we need to ask you a couple of questions. None of our guests get to leave without answering these two questions. So our first question for you is, if you could be a fly on a wall in a situation, when would that be and who would be there?
Yeah. Well, I'm a mad Arsenal supporter. In fact, I was at the Emirates last night.
But so was I, Gary.
So was I. Yeah,
we won.
But I'm actually going to say, this is going to kill you there, probably, Chris. But I would love to have been on the wall at Istanbul with Steven Gerrard and that team, 3-0 down at half time. What did he say to those guys to turn that around in 45 minutes? And those are the moments you sort of think, whether it's him or I think it was Benitez was the manager, whoever was being a fly on listening to them, you know, that would have been something to understand, because that's an impossible position. Yeah. You know, it's again sport, but like I said, that's who I'd like to have heard, you know, and
but that's all around kind of human psychology, isn't it? How can you get people to just reframe a situation and perform differently with such intensity. You haven't got long to talk to those people, and something needs to happen quickly. It's quite remarkable.
I always wonder what Arsene would have said. You know, when it was like the Invincibles or whatever it was, it was up to 49. You sort of must get to a point where, what do you say? You know, well, okay. Well, we've won 37 now, so we haven't lost 37, so let's just keep going. It's an interesting one, how you keep that motivation.
Yeah. And I'll follow up, Gary. Sorry, I was going to say, so if you can meet somebody, you were given the opportunity to meet somebody, so you can sit down in a nice comfy chair with a glass of wine or a beer or champagne, whatever your choice is. What would you go with? Who would be there?
Alive or dead?
Yeah.
It would always have been. I've read his books, you know, and is Winston Churchill.
Right.
Just sitting there with him, you know, and he wouldn't listen to me. I just listened to him, you know, and that can you imagine sitting in front of that man, what that he had to do and what he did, and you know, none of us will be here now.
The weight of those, just the weight of the decisions he had to make,
and his wit. I think that was the other thing, isn't it? He had a very dry sense of humour. I love some of the phrases he used to put other people down. I don't mean that rudely, but as in to just respond to when he'd been criticised. But
he had a tongue like a razor, you know. But it would have been wow. Can you imagine? And then there's so many people that you could, you know, sit back and want to listen to, and you know, Muhammad Ali and whoever, you know. But that man,
he was the right man for the right time, wasn't he?
Oh, in that moment. As you say, I think things would have been very different if you hadn't been there.
Well, yeah, without a doubt.
Gary, it's been an absolute joy. I always enjoy our conversations. We've had many over the years, but to get this one recorded has been lovely.
Yeah, and we haven't got a drink.
No,
normally it's with a glass of wine or a cup of coffee or something.
Well, thank you so much.
But also, I think it's just great just to chart how dentistry's changed, and you know what I love is after these years, you've still got so much energy for it, so much zest. You're still at the forefront of growing something new in dentistry, and that's a real testament to you that you know you still have the outlook of an apprentice. You're still that kid at the dental lab in Bexhill. You're still looking for new ways of doing things and learning new ways of going about what you do, which I think is amazing.
You never stop learning. And I would just caveat that I've got wonderful people around me. It's a wonderful team, you know, and with Sam and Julie Ross, and you know, and there's a team there that I think as you go through the business of our Portman, you know, you have to have different people at different times to take that on another notch, and we're blessed with the people that we work with. That is for sure.
Yeah.
But thank you so much, guys.
Not at all. No, thank you, Gary. It's been wonderful. No doubt we'll be catching up at some point soon as well.
Definitely.
Indeed.
Excellent. Look after
Cheers,
yourself.
man. Thank you.
Cheers, Gary. Thank you for listening to this episode of Dentology, where we discuss the business of dentistry. If you like what you heard, please do subscribe where you found this episode. That would be amazing. And also follow us on Instagram.